Almost 2 years after the Right to Education Act came into force, little seems to have changed over the period of time. NGO Pratham has released a report that suggests that the education system at primary level remains flat over the last 2 years. We have with us Yamini Aiyer of Center for Policy Research to discuss about the learning outcome. Yamini, we are 2 years into the Right to Education Act that promises quality and access. Why there is no outcome we can see on the field?
I think there are many ways of looking at this. One, that RTE was only fully implemented in 2010. So it's just about been 1.5 years. And if you look at how much the state governments have been doing to comply with the RTE, only now the final rules and notifications have been put into place. So to begin with, I think it's important to remember that it's very early days yet. To see any real impact on the ground takes years. But having said that, the pace at which the change is happening is quite slow. And I think there are 2 or 3 reasons for that. One is that the RTE, largely, if you look at the norms under the RTE, it focused mostly on closing the gap for infrastructure and inputs. So it's been focused on closing the gap for enrollments. If you see the numbers in today's Aiyer report, enrollment numbers have increased. We are almost touching 100%. Out of school children, particularly for girls, has seen a significant improvement as well of late. So to that extent, some amount of movement has happened. And the interesting thing is that it's happened because the whole focus of RTE for the last 2 years has been on improving enrollment numbers. The other aspect of RTE has been to improve infrastructure in schools. Now, improving infrastructure in schools is a long-term process. Money has gone, but it takes time for the entire infrastructure process of getting technical sanctions, junior engineer ka sanction, and so on and so forth. It's a long process. That process takes a few years, and so works on the ground have not started as fast as we would like. This is a consequence of governance deficiencies.
You talk about the state-center complexities. My second question is, the slow growth in right to education implementation, is it because of poor implementation? Is it because of financial mismanagement, or is it a governance issue between the state and the center?
I think it's a combination of all things. It is largely a governance issue, and it's a governance issue which both the center and the state are hiding behind. So the center says it's the state's fault, but really the center holds the purse strings. If you see the way education is being financed, increasingly Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan is the main financer for elementary education. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan is a vehicle for RTE. If you see how Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan planning is done, ultimately the decision-making role is held at the central government. Yet the central government says, and we heard Mr. Kapil Sibal today at the Aiyer launch saying that it's not the central government is doing whatever it can, it's the state governments that are not pushing. The state governments make exactly the same argument that ultimately we can't do our own schemes, we can't push our own programs because the central government imposes rules and guidelines on us. So this is a governance problem. It's a problem that comes from complicated questions around our federal structures. Added to this, if the RTE were to work the way the RTE is supposed to work, it says very clearly that the RTE has to implement a decentralized planning structure. School management committees are being created for it. It's supposed to go bottom up. But our entire fund flow structure is such that the money is flowing from the top, the decision is being made at the top, and the implementation is happening at the school. So there's a complete disconnect in the planning system. There's a disconnect between what is stated as a policy goal, and there's a disconnect between the way the finances are managed, the decisions are managed, and the final outcome on the ground.
One of the highlights of the Aiyer report is increase of private enrollment. That is, the schools, more number of students are getting enrolled in private schools and more number of students are taking private tuitions. What does this signify? Does it mean that government has failed to provide quality education to the people at large?
Oh, absolutely. I think it certainly does. The increased privatization is also a sign of aspiration of parents. I think there are 2 or 3 interesting things there. One, that what we do need to look at further is whether this increased privatization is creating a gender divide. Because my own anecdotal experience, and this is not, there's no evidence for it, but whenever I travel, I see this. Very often families make a decision, decision usually is that the boys go to private schools if they can afford to only send one, and then the girls go to government schools. And families tend to pay more attention to what's happening in private schools because for various reasons they believe, and perhaps quite rightly so, that the private school teacher will actually show up, that they have more accountability over the private school rather has more accountability over the parents. So they engage with that school more than they engage with the government school where the trust is totally broken.
In 3 months' time, we are entering the 12th 5-year plan. And from policy point of view, it is significant. A lot of money is going to be pumped into the education system. New rules are coming in. From education point of view, can you give us 3 things that the policymakers need to remember while framing policies that will drive the education sector for the next 5 years?
I'll only talk about one because I think it's the most important. If you think about what the right to education is trying to achieve, and that is the stated policy goal of the government, the right to education is trying to ensure age-appropriate mainstreaming for learning for children, and its vehicle to do this is through the School Management Committee. I think the 12th five-year plan is an opportunity to really rethink how to capacitate, empower, strengthen the School Management Committee to actually take full ownership and ensure accountability for the school. This would require that school management committees be given block grants so that they have discretion over expenditure, that more decision making is empowered at that school management committee level, that more focus is put on capacity building for the school management committees, and that overlaid onto this, the Government of India and the state governments put in a strong system for fiscal transparency so that we don't end up in problems of corruption.
Thank you, Yamini. Thank you so much.